and welcome to this week's edition of Move Well with Takia and Anthony. We are delighted to be here with you today. For those of you who do not know us, my name is Takia Geddes, and I am a kinetic specialist and a life activation coach, the creator of the Kinetic Life Revolution. Anthony Saul is a certified personal trainer and behavior specialist. And we are coming to you with information on all things that pertain to wellness and fitness, just to add some value to your life. And we enjoy being with each other and also having these conversations. And so hopefully you can glean something that is advantageous to you. And we will also love what you like for us to talk about. We'd love to hear that from you and hear you chime in. So comment below, share this with anyone that you feel it will be beneficial for, and we'd love to have you. And so let's get into it, Anthony. So today we're talking about functional training. Do you want to just share with the folks, what your definition of functional training is?
Yeah, no, I really like this topic, and I think this is going to be one of the more directly beneficial topics to the widest range of people, because functional fitness has kind of been used as a buzzword in fitness. I feel like in the last, decade probably, and it kind of has taken a lot of different meanings and can mean a lot of different things to different people. So I think it's a really important topic to discuss and kind of give our perspectives on, so that we can kind of like narrow down what it actually is and how it can actually help people. So this idea of functional fitness, is the way I think of it, is that it's just a mode of exercising that directly has direct correlation to things that people do in their everyday lives, like have direct impacts on activities of daily living, whether that be exercises that improve your posture, improve your ability to walk, run, throw things, jump, pick up your children, wash your back, buckle your seatbelt, just any activities of daily life that we need to get through and live our lives to the highest of quality and the highest of standards, and just practicing those modalities in a structured way, so that when the time comes to perform those activities, you don't injure yourself or you lose that ability to perform the activities that are important to us and add value to our lives and make us productive people.
So I agree with you. I think that functional training definitely is a buzzword. I think it gets overused. So the word functional means that something serves the purpose for which it was created, right? And so functional, to me, can be applied to whatever your goal is. So let's say your goal is to be able to, like you said, lift up your grandchildren. So there are certain things, certain patterns that you can practice, certain movements you can practice, certain areas of strength that you can focus on in order to be able to accomplish that more safely and more fluidly. But if your goal is to be on the U.S. soccer team, right, your training is going to be different. So the programming is going to be functional based on what your goal is. So, when people say functional training, what I think their meaning is that you get better at human performance. You get better at human movements that are ingrained, primal movement patterns, things that allow us to move in all planes of motion.
Kind of an activity-specific way as well, right? I think that was an important thing that you touched on.
Yeah. But it really is, it really depends on what your goal is. And that's what makes a program functional. So if you and I have different goals, then our program is going to be different. And therefore, the function of that training program is going to be geared to what we specifically desire to be the outcome. So I think the overuse of the buzzword, really confuses people. I think they don't really understand what it is. And so when you come to, a trainer, or you come to, you're looking for a video, or you're looking for some way to have something to follow in order to reach your goals, the first thing is to be really clear about what they are. And you can identify, either someone to talk to about what would be the best process. For most people who are just entering kind of this space of getting fit, maybe who don't have a strong athletic background or a strong background in movement, you are going to have a different perspective on and a different level of perceived exertion than someone who does have an athletic background or a dance background. Like I trained a dancer and a few dancers over a period of time, and their movement patterns are different because of the training that's ingrained in them, usually since they're very small. And some of the movement patterns that they have ingrained are counterintuitive to our primal movement patterns. So it requires a retraining of those patterns in order for them to move efficiently in daily life.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
sorry, go ahead. I was just going to say, sorry, go ahead. You got it.
I was just going to say, like, so compare that to like a football player, right? So they require different, like in order to play football, you need power, you need strength, you need agility, right? So there are certain aspects that overlap between the dancer and the football player. However, the likelihood is that because of the movement patterns that you've been accustomed to as a football player that tend to be closer, I think, to our primal patterns than a dancer who counterintuitively is taught to point things and raise things and hold things in a very rigid position. Whereas a football player, the way that you become a better football player is that you become stronger and more powerful in movements that are almost mathematically positioned to give you the most advantage over gravity, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So you have a different base of understanding and knowledge of how to generate force, and you don't have as many of the kind of rigid patterns that get formed from having to hold things just so. See what I'm saying? Uh-oh. So we'll wait for Anthony to come back. He froze for just a moment. So we're talking about, create functional training here and what it is and how it can apply to you on your journey of wellness. And really what it comes down to, as I said earlier, is really understanding what your goal is. So if you're a dancer who wants to just now move into life and be functional and be healthy and feel well and be able to, move into the next phase of your life in a healthy way, and perhaps rehab some of the injuries that you acquired as a dancer, then functional training, as it's defined for improving daily living, would be a great way for you to go, because human movement patterns haven't changed. There's a foundation of movement patterns that are associated with the stages of development. And sometimes you'll find even really high level athletes who achieved great feats physically actually have some issues with their foundational patterns, because perhaps they walked too early, their parents stood them up on their feet, and they didn't actually go through the stages of development completely and in an organic way. And so a lot of the neural connections and the kind of muscle memory didn't get built along the way. And actually, a lot of times I'll have to actually work with them, go backwards and start there, just to connect them in a way that is more in alignment with their correct patternings. The likelihood is that someone who hasn't developed the correct patterns over time has developed compensatory patterns. So other things have taken control, and they developed ways to achieve the same movements, but using muscles that weren't necessarily designed to achieve what they're trying to accomplish. And so, welcome back.
Where were you? I'm sorry to interrupt.
I was just sharing with people just how how important patterns are to teach people.
Mhm.
And I was sharing the way that, patterns actually can show up for people misaligned, even in the highest level of athletes. So,
Mhm.
you can be a high functioning athlete and still have patterns that are misfiring. Perhaps it could go back to your youthful days when you were a baby and maybe you walked too early. Maybe your parents had you standing on your feet too soon and you didn't get enough crawling in.
Mhm.
And so that transitory contralateral motion and connection didn't get built. And it's possible that some of the injuries that took place in your career had a lot to do with your lack of a really ingrained solid patterning in certain movements. And so I was saying, that, along the same lines of what we've been discussing, if you're, say, a dancer who's now ready to transition into, kind of repopulate into normal life and not be a dancer anymore,
Mhm.
actually going back to the basics of human development can be a really great foundation for someone who has been ingrained in kind of very rigid or counterintuitive motions for a very long time, even at a high level. I've trained athletes who didn't have good patterning because they walked too early, and so they
Mhm.
really
Wow.
they really really deeply ingrained that contralateral patterning for them on a base level because they develop compensatory patterns later on to achieve the same kind of motion, but using patterns that weren't efficient, which then led to injuries during their career. So I was just sharing, how that could relate to
Yeah.
someone, who maybe doesn't have an athletic background. Maybe they walked too early and then
Mhm.
didn't actually get involved in sports, and so didn't even really develop effective workarounds for some of the like squat pattern. Instead of squatting, they
Mhm.
bend over. Right? You've seen people like that, right, Anthony? People who
Yeah.
instead of squatting, they
Of
like bend
course.
over
Yeah.
their back and they use their lumbar to pick things up because they never learned properly how to deadlift or to squat. And so now they're back over time.
Mhm.
We're very adaptable and we're very resilient, which can work against us sometimes because it could be 20 years down the road before you realize that before your back actually starts to fail you in those positions. You could get away with bending over in order to lift something for a
Mhm.
very long time until the weakness combined with the ill patterning at the wrong moment sends you into a tizzy.
Yeah, and I think that's something that I've appreciated since working with you about your training style. And I think this is a very important aspect of whether you're working with a trainer or working with your friends or working on your own is looking at your body as a whole. And it's like this idea of the kinetic chain
Yeah.
and looking from the feet down and when we have issues with our movements or having issues with our muscles or our joints or having chronic pain somewhere and trying to find the root cause of it as I guess in a more holistic way of thinking and looking at the person as an entire body, and it's almost like an investigation if you think about it, and like looking at lifestyle habits, some early injuries that might have happened a long time ago, and trying to find the root cause of what may be causing those deficiencies in their movement or that chronic pain, so we can get to the root of it instead of just kind of working around it or continuing to work around it or putting a band-aid on a bigger issue. So, and that's
Exactly.
the gift of functional training and like functional movement assessments and stuff like that. So
100%. And also the value of working with professional, right? Because if you're someone who
mhm.
has some of these issues, maybe you've developed, knee pain, and you realize that you need to get stronger. So you buy a video or you go to a class like Zumba or something that has a
Mhm.
lot of torque on the hips, the ankles, and the knees. And then that'll be okay for about a week or maybe even 2 months. And then you're going to start to develop issues,
Mhm.
soreness around certain joints. And then eventually there's going to be some type of injury due to the micro tears that have taken place because of the compensation that's been taking place while you were having fun. So I think it's
Mhm.
beneficial to work with someone who actually understands the body, just at least to create a foundation of strength.
Mhm.
And like you said, I love to look from the feet
Yeah.
up, because so many of people's issues come from a lack of strong foundation and just posture and standing. and I come across a lot of people. I just worked with someone who his toes were actually, so he initially came to me because when he was going for walks, more and more and more, he started to veer off, and he didn't understand why he couldn't continue straight. And he was having shoulder and back pain. And the first thing I said was, let me see your feet. And I looked down at his feet, and his one foot, his toes were so far curved to the left. It was his left foot, and his toes were curled over to the left so far that it started to affect his navigation. Right. And it started to rotate his body. So his chest was still facing forward, but his hips were now rotated to the side. And so that's why he thought he was going straight, because his chest was pointing straight, but his feet were not. And just like, they teach you in football, your body will follow your head. So they tell you to leave with your head, because wherever you're right. So when you head fake, right, people get faked out because your body will go where your head goes. Same thing with your feet. When you go to change direction, they tell you to look, because that's your body will follow, but they also tell you to step in that direction, because wherever your toes point, that is where you're going to have the most power in that trajectory of force. You're going to have and it's going to be the safest, because where your feet go, then your ankles go, then your knees go, then your hips follow, right? So
that's some really intricate stuff. Like, that's some really detailed and intricate stuff. And had he not had someone that was very detail oriented in that way, he may have never discovered that and gone in all these different directions that would not have led to the end result, or these improved results that I'm sure you guys are getting after for sure.
Yeah. So the first several months, literally all we did was work on his feet. And within the first 2 months, he was walking straight again. His pain was decreased, almost gone in his shoulder and back. And now his toes are almost straight. And now we're working on his patterns, because of the compensation that took place for whatever the weakness in the feet were that caused his toes to do what they were doing. He thought his toes were never going to be straight. They were always kind of crooked. And so that tells me that he had an issue from very young. And then over time, his body compensated more and more and more to gain stability somehow to keep him on his feet because he's an active guy. He's in very good shape physically. Yeah. So that's an example of how, your patterns can get screwed up, even though you're high functioning. And so now we're reworking his patterns, because because of the way his foot was turned and his body was like contrary to his alignment was contrary. Right, his connection to his back body, his hamstrings, his glutes is like non-existent. He wasn't connecting on his squats. His butt was never sore. He could never actually activate his glutes to do anything. That's partly why he started to develop issues in walking, because he was never actually getting the full hip extension. So I know this is a lot of terminology for people who don't really understand, the body yet, but just know that it all matters. And so developing a strong foundation in proper form and in proper function of your primary movement patterns is essential for every human, regardless of what your goals are.
Yeah, no, I think that was very well said. And that was a great example of kind of maybe a more extreme example of looking at the body as a whole and implying some functional training and looking at the lifestyles and everything that goes into having productive patterns. Do you want to go into a little bit about what are some of the more fundamental movement patterns and training techniques that you typically employ, and even assessment techniques that you employ to kind of get people moving in a way that serves them and functionally in their everyday lives?
Sure. So I think keeping it really simplistic, I would say that the first thing that I look for is I look at their posture to make sure they're properly aligned, that their spine is properly aligned, and their joints are properly aligned around their center of mass. And then, I'm looking then for asymmetries in patterns. So I want to know that your left is moving at least in the same range as your right, and you have a modicum of balance and strength on both sides of your body, right? So we're looking for symmetry. Asymmetry is one of the primary causes of injury. And so symmetry both in your range of motion and in your strength because injuries tend to stem from an imbalance of tension around joints over long periods of time. And so the longer those imbalances are in place, the greater the chances that you're going to be injured. And so that's the first thing. We're looking to achieve symmetry. And that's that's simple for people to understand, that you don't want to be so dominant with your right hand and so ill informed neurologically with your left side that you can't do the same thing with almost equal strength. You want to be able to use both sides of the body equally as best you can. And a lot of times I'll actually end up training people 2-to-1, left side to right side, or right side to left side, depending on their dominant patterns. Because if you just continue to train someone with equal weight, equal reps on both sides, then you just get stronger.
The other side will never catch up.
Right. So, even if you've never really played sports, and so I played lacrosse, and so I was always very dominant with my right, even though I used my left, I didn't use them equally, especially in the beginning of my career. So I had to train 2-to-1 when I became knowledgeable, enough to know that was necessary, because I had my right side, my back was just so muscular, and my left side was trying to catch up, but it was lacking. Yeah, so I had to even it out, because it was causing imbalances that were causing a tightness on one side of my spine, and I already had a little bit of scoliosis happening, so I had to balance that out, so that I could get, so that I didn't develop pain over time. So I think that creating balance in the body is a primary goal of mine for almost every client. There are some cases where there are certain structural issues that require a different approach, just because balance isn't possible because of the structure itself. However, for most people, that's not the case. For most people, you're looking to create balance. So that's the base. So that's the first question, right? That was what you want me to address initially.
Yeah, and I think that kind of can get us into the idea of corrective exercise, and when we do see those imbalances or those structural, I guess, imbalances, finding exercises and knowing, having the knowledge of the muscles and the anatomy in order to incorporate the right exercises and the right rep ranges and the schemes and patterns to work on correcting those is super important, obviously. And that's where, if someone has bad posture, working on those upper traps and the scapulas and making sure that those are functioning correctly with lat pull downs, face pulls, band pull aparts, or that's just one example if you want to kind of dive into this, I guess, some corrective exercise stuff.
Yeah. So I think one of the most important things about the idea of corrective exercise is that you can't train around pain. You can't train through pain. The body pain response affects the entire body. It affects your hormones. It would affect the function of all of you. You can't just say, oh, my shoulder hurts, so I'll just train legs. You just can't. You can't. So what you have to do is identify what's causing the pain and address it. And that might mean 6 to 8 weeks of corrective exercise so that the body is back into balance, and then you can train it as a unit. Because you really can't, you can't leave an appendage out. There's no substitute for you can't out train pain, just like you can't, out train your fork. You're eating, 2 times the number of calories that your body can't expend them. You're not gonna get fit. It's just how it is. You can't move well if you have an injury.
Yeah, absolutely. So what are some of your favorite strength conditioning exercises or core exercises that you like to employ people that, if we're working with someone that's a relatively healthy client who is a general population, just kind of wants to get more involved with fitness, kind of get better control of their body, whether that be whatever goals that may lead to, what are some of your go-to? Because I know you get kind of creative with the exercises. You like a lot of your lateral work and deep core work. So I kind of want to hear your perspective on some specific exercises you like to employ.
Sure. So one of the things that the primary focus a lot of times with brand new people is connection through their core and correct firing patterns. So a lot of times because people sit so frequently, their glutes are very very, very weak, and as are their hip flexors. And their core connection, their ability to access their core, like their intrinsic core should fire, when they move. But what I find is that doesn't happen, or it happens in poor patterning. And you might have one side that's being overworked, and another side that's barely functioning. So I try to achieve balance in people's kind of hip and core. Well, the hips are part of the core. I think the core can be said to go from at least the sternum down to the pubic bone, and maybe even beyond, a little bit beyond the groin. 360, right? So the primary goal is to get people functioning well there, and their patterns firing well there first. And so I'll start with a hip bridge. I'll start with a dead bug, or I'm starting to rename that. I renamed it resting bug because I don't like calling it dead bug.
I'll start using that too. We'll make a catch on.
Yes. So I call it resting bug. I just say the bug is just chilling on his back, taking a nap, and then I'll help people move from there. So if no one has ever seen a resting bug, it's when you move your limbs in a contralateral pattern so that your core has to fire cross body, and it uses both sides of your brain, right? So this helps with that neural connection. It helps to get people's patterns firing correctly again in their core. Connecting upper and lower body through the center of your body, right, is something that people need assistance with, because their patterns tend to be more linear when they're not active. And so they're not used to doing that. They're not used to connecting to their brain, connecting their upper and lower body to move in any kind of coordination. And so also I really love bird dog, which is the kind of flip side cousin of resting bug, which I focused on the connection again through upper and lower body, connecting through the center, but also connecting the glutes to the lats, because that's also a connection that gets lost when you are sedentary and or just have limited planar movement. If you're not moving in multiple planes, you just don't have that same type of strong connection. And then I think probably the third thing, and then then a dead bug or bird dog or resting bug, it kind of also it introduces that rotary force, right, which we need. So in order to engage the obliques and the side body in general, the slings along the side body, which are really important. And so and then I'll do another exercise that requires the slings in the front of the body to coordinate the opposite of that bird dog motion. That is also engaging flexion, but in a more focused way, because we're in flexion all the time, but we're in like a resting flexion. So we're sitting in a kind of a numb flexion. So I engage flexion, but from an active point perspective, because we want to try to keep the core engaged even when we're sitting, right? And so that's why I incorporate so specific exercise. I just call it a front sling crunch. I don't have really, there's no name for it. I just have people engage their adductors, their core, and from an overhead position, all three at the same time, which brings up their whole front body awake and makes them more aware of the connection that they have, into their pelvis. So that's a 360 kind of all on the floor, right? So this is not standing up yet. Then the next thing we want to address is your transitory pattern. How you're walking, because the things that you do the most are going to show up the most. Things that you do the most are going to affect you the most. So if you walk every day, and if your walking pattern is not effective or efficient, and you're compensating all the time, you're going to end up with some kind of injury or an affected area that's going to be counterintuitive to what we're doing on the mat. So I think they can work together. So, I'll start them on the ground. So like that transitory motion which is a movement pattern, by the way. So we're talking about movement patterns here. So push, pull, rotate, twist, right? Bend. And then transitioning is also a movement pattern. So how we locomote, right? So I'll start them on the floor in like a half kneeling position to kind of bring more awareness to just being in a split stance position, and then all the things that are present for you in that position. You can really tell a lot about someone in that half kneeling position. Their lack of hip flexion strength, their lack of full range or access to their hip extension. I've worked with people who can't extend fully, but in their brain they think they are, but their hips are still like 5 degrees behind their center. So being able to get full hip extension, if you can't get it on the floor, you're not going to be able to get it standing. Because just like, remember in practice, you would always practice. Like you play football. I make football analogies so I know you'll get it. Like you always went like 200% in practice, because in the game things speed up so fast that there's always going to be a little bit of a narrowing of whatever pattern you practice. So if you practice handoffs and you just do this real quick in practice, and you don't actually practice creating the space for the ball and taking the steps and counting them out and going through the motion slow and getting the motion right, and then speed it up, but practice getting that opening wide enough for them to fit the ball in so there's no fumbling, right? I guarantee in a game you're going to start here, and there's not going to be enough room for the ball because you won't open wide enough, right? There's going to be so you always exaggerate everything in practice. So that's what I do also in training.
Absolutely, and just doing the little things right.
Because in life, you if I have you walk at full extension or practice full extension here, I know it's going to be half that when you walk and you're not with me. Right? So it's the same principles. Like, to me, you're an athlete, you're just practicing for life.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think a big part of functional training and how that neuromuscular connection between the person and the body is obviously super key. And how I like to build that connection with people is making sure that all of their movements, no matter what they're doing, are deliberate and controlled. And that can be just applied to anything that we're doing in the gym. So like you said, a lot of that, making sure when they're doing something like resting bugs or bird dogs, that they're not just flailing their limbs around. They might be performing the exercise correctly technically, but making sure that they're making those movements deliberately and they're feeling what they should be feeling. Same thing with any type of exercise, whether we're doing another one that I love are bear crawl movements. I love having this idea, going back to that rudimentary primal movements of having people move their bodies like we did when we were babies, and we had the ability that we had when we were children. I remember in football, we would have bear crawls up and down the field as kind of like a punishment, actually. And we would all just flail our limbs around, just trying to get it done quickly as possible and not actually doing any type of work that was building or improving our performance in any way. So now, while performing those, something like a bear crawl, making sure that it is very structured and very disciplined, and we are performing them with correct form so that we're actually getting the most out of them instead of just using them as a punishment or something to burn calories or kind of get your heart rate up. And it's just always coming back to deliberate movements, and working in those primal movements is super important.
Yeah, 100%. So two things that came to my mind when you said that, so I worked with someone who had a brain injury, had part of their brain removed. And so part of their rehab, I actually just had them crawling on hands and knees, not even bear crawling, but just going through the motion of that primal pattern of crawling, that developmental pattern of crawling is it's so healthy and helpful. And it directly translated to her walking. So I just can't understate the importance, like you said, of that patterning and being deliberate about it. And then I think how I like to lead that, I like to have it lead somewhere. Just like you don't want to just practice all your life. You also want to get in the game. So I try to lead them through a process and then incorporate it into something playful. So that their reactional patterns in the moment then become the patterns that we've been developing. Because if we were just to play from the beginning, you can see their patterns. The beginning are a lot of times misfiring, right? And then we do the training. Then I'll revisit the play and see how their patterns have changed, because they become the new instinctual way of moving over a long period enough time and enough repetition. And for them, it's more fun because then they feel like they can move safely. Then they feel better about moving into like activities like pickleball, those types of things, and feel, no matter how old you are, you can still do those things and do them safely because you've done the work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that goes, I'm just thinking of so many different exercises, like exercises that we would consider relatively basic, like goblet squats and how farmer carries and how they directly apply to everyday life. Like thinking of like a goblet squat as if you ever need to lift up a jug of water, or a case of water, or where if we do farmer carries, I always like to tell people to like act like you're carrying groceries in. And it's just so many examples of performing these exercises correctly in the gym and getting the repetition of these exercises down and watching how they apply to everyday life, like a single leg RDL when you need to pick up a pencil off of the ground, just little things like that, and how they can improve your life. Like as a trainer, one of the biggest compliments that I get from my clients is when, hey, I was thinking about you when I was carrying my groceries in, and I like kind of like made sure my posture was good and made sure my core was tight. And I'm like, it's like that is what exercise is all about. And then that's kind of what functional training is all about at the end of the day.
1,000%. I feel you on that. And that's the thing that warms my heart too. When people tell me, it was easier to pick up my granddaughter. Like I picked her up and didn't even think about it, and I carried her around and I didn't have any pain or discomfort. I wasn't worried, it's those types of things. And those are the things that you can look for. Cause sometimes when you're doing functional training, like you're not working on show me muscles, ones that you see in the mirror. I think a great side effect over time is a better looking, physique. In general, you become more toned, you become stronger, more stable, and that can be reflected in the external, aesthetics. But it's not going to be like bodybuilding, where you start to see, muscles popping out everywhere. And so you have to really know, like we were talking about, this great way to wrap it, right? The way we began, we talked about, the importance of knowing what your goal is, to know then how to design a functional program to meet those needs, to achieve the outcome that you desire. And so if your goal is to be able to, pick up your grandchild or carry your own groceries without needing help from the store clerk, then you need to put farmer's carries into your workout. And if you want to, I just saw the other day, a guy came in to the gym and bent over. He dropped his little water bottle, really big, huge, muscle building guy. And he's like had been a bodybuilder for quite a long time. And he grunted, and bent over to pick up on one leg because it was easier than squatting. Well, I'm sure it was the ease factor, not necessarily an ability factor. Bent over on one leg, then scooped it up and came back up. He didn't use his
close call.
It was more of a lever. He just kind of used his leg as a lever. And I said, whoa, like he really needs help moving. That's what he now he's got muscles. Now you need help moving. Like, can you use those to help you move well? Yeah, we did there.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Because moving well improves the quality of your life. Just having big muscles doesn't necessarily translate to quality of life. So.
Wow, and it comes right back to the name of the podcast, Move Well.
Awesome.
All right, I think that was a great talk. I appreciate it.
You too, man. Thanks, everybody. I hope to see you again. Peace and love.
All right. Thank you.